Well, at the very least, they did not do the same plot as the comic book that they took the name for this one from. Whew. Not that they could have, really, but still. No real influence. That's a good thing. Spider-Man, brand new day. I'm actually getting to something kind of timely. Don't ask me when I'm going to get to the Odyssey. It is not a priority for me. So this one I did want to see because I like Spider-Man, and I went with my boyfriend because he really likes Spider-Man. And this is good. I'm actually kind of glad that, because I saw this actually 2 days ago now, from when I'm recording and probably releasing this video. And I'm kind of glad I had that extra time because initially coming out of it, I at no point did I think it was bad, but I think it was more mixed first stepping out of the theater than I feel right now. I think part of it is there were times coming out of it where I was like, I'm not sure if all the story threads complemented each other thematically. I'm not sure if these actually built on each other as themes and as messages and as, core ways of going about this. But the more I think about it, I think most of it does. There might be a little bit more crammed in here than it needs, but I think most of what's here at least works towards a greater whole a little bit. Some of it I think should have been tweaked or either tweaked to make it more resonant with everything else that was going on or removed to streamline a little. But in hindsight, I don't think there's anything in here that flat out does not belong. Everything is adding at least a little. So that's a good thing. I'm going to talk vagaries and go spoiler free initially. I will talk spoilers. Obviously, there's some big ones to deal with. So, much more somber tone than this particular Spider-Man. Actually, Spider-Man movies in general, this is probably the most somber tone we've had since the Andrew Garfield movies, for the overall thing. I mean, there's still lighter moments, there's still comedy. Tom Holland's still charming as ever. But, overall, it's a much more melancholic tone than we've had. Because Homecoming, Far From Home, No Way Home had their more serious and more somber moments, but never was that the pervasive mood of the thing overall. And even if you go back to Raimi with something like Spider-Man 3, which was a jumbled mess, but it was still lighter in tone than this. Now, it's not going full it's all dark and gritty now, thankfully. They're not pulling that, but it is a lot more subdued tonally than I had been used to this Spider-Man being. I don't want Spider-Man to stay in this sort of realm in terms of a, heavier tone. I say heavy, it's not like it's dealing with, extreme themes, but just the mood of the thing. It just has a heavier feel. The mood is weighing on the movie in a way that is very intentional. And I wouldn't want another Spider-Man movie to feel like it has the mood that this one has. But especially with the benefit of a couple of days to think about it, I actually do think it pulls together and works pretty well as it is deployed here, especially for what they are doing with Peter. Because this picks up, I was going to say pretty much immediately. Actually, no. Technically, this is picking up at least 4 years later than where we left off at the end of No Way Home. Because at the end of No Way Home, Peter was going to approach MJ and tell him about, her having forgot about him. He opted not to, and Ned and MJ went off to MIT, which all three of them were supposed to go to. And we have a kind of a sequence at the front. This isn't really a spoiler, sort of covering the fact that while Peter's kind of been keeping tabs on them mostly just by following Ned's social media posts, Ned and MJ have gone to school, sophomore year, junior year, senior. They've graduated. There's no implication of master degrees. So I think it's just 4-year degrees that they have. But this is a significant turn of time. And I think actually giving us a glimpse at that time helps sell the mood, because Spider-Man in general tends to be a lighter superhero, or at least he presents a face of being a lighter superhero. And Tom Holland's has very much been that. So giving us, it's not quite a montage, but it is, quick leaps in time initially at the front end. And it does give us a good look at how being alone, which is the choice that he's made for himself, is weighing on him and giving the whole thing a little bit of a darker tone, but not entirely, because it's not like he has nothing. He has thrown himself into the job very fully. There's this whole thing with him and this, I can't remember if she's a captain or a lieutenant, somebody on the police force that he's in direct contact with. And even she is telling him, like, dude, do you do anything besides this? But at the same time, he's proving incredibly effective. So, which makes sense, something that's like reinforcing to him that he made the right choice, because he's doing so much more good being Spider-Man and not having a life. So I like that dynamic between him and the cop. And we also, okay, so I think I can deal with this in spoiler free, because he showed up in the trailers. So Frank Castle is in this. The Punisher is in this. And I do like the dynamic that they have between these two characters. I actually think in general, Spider-Man and the Punisher can be very fun characters to play off each other if you do it right. I do think for the most part this does. It's just the fact that I hate this version of the Punisher. I've talked about this elsewhere. Short version, and normally I wouldn't pin this on the actor, but I know that Jon Bernthal has maintained a pretty high degree of input on how his version of Frank Castle is written and depicted. So I am going to kind of lay it at his feet. Jon Bernthal and I fundamentally disagree about what makes Frank Castle an interesting character. Because I can like the Punisher quite a bit, actually. But he and I fundamentally disagree about what are the good aspects of the Punisher. Now, that doesn't make him wrong and me right. I have the same thing with Doctor Who. It's the reason literally anybody, if you ask them to rank every Doctor Who, every actor who's played Doctor Who, you'll get a different ranking nearly every time, simply because what one person likes about the show overall is not the same as what another person likes, and different eras had different emphasis, so you're gonna like the one that played to what you like about Doctor Who, but other eras might play to the things that you don't like as much. It's the same thing here with the Punisher. It's not that it's an incorrect take on the Punisher, it's just one that disregards the stuff that I would prefer about the Punisher in favor of a lot of stuff that I don't think is a particularly interesting thing to do with him. All of which is still valid, especially if you're considering canon. But again, he and I disagree about what makes this character good. The one thing I will flat out complain about, because I'll continue to complain about it, because somebody needs to stop him already, is the fact that he keeps doing the big loud yell and grunts, which is at its most absurd in this one shot where he's like firing this assault rifle, and like, the dude's a military tactician. And like he's there, like the way a scared extra trying to shoot Batman would handle a gun. I hate that he does that. They got to stop him with the yelling. That's a nitpick. I should stop, because while Frank is a recurrent thing across the movie, he pops up intermittently, he's by no means the main focus. So I need to get off that. Overall, I did enjoy this. If I were to rank the Tom Holland Spider-Mans, it's going to sound like I didn't enjoy it, but keep in mind, I go back and forth between whether I like Homecoming or No Way Home better. So, like, I'm not even entirely sure which of those I'd put at the top, but beneath those two, I would put this one, and then Far From Home is way down. I don't like Far From Home. Like, really at all. There's very little that I like about that movie. And again, that has more to do with personal taste than anything else. But yeah, I did not like Far From Home very much at all. But this is still really good and really solid. And it's very well thought out in terms of the way it progresses. And it progresses a little bit atypically for a Spider-Man movie, or even a superhero movie in general, because so much of the focus is just on Peter. And while there is a villain that it builds up and then reveals and then deals with, it's not structured the way you'd expect most sort of villain-centric superhero stories to be told, because it's not villain-centric, not for most of its runtime anyway. Like, the villain gets more of a focus once the reveal of who it is and what the deal is happens, and that's a conversation for the spoiler section. So But building up to that, it just feels like it's way, way, way more focused on just Peter and how he's doing. And it's not great. So overall, I think this is a really good launching point to get into whatever the next thing is. I have a feeling I don't necessarily expect my assessment of this one to go up, but I feel like it is a really strong launching pad to potentially do something phenomenal in the next one. And I don't mean that in a they set up plot threads that they flat out don't deal with or it's a cliffhanger. I don't mean anything like that. I just mean that this makes sense, especially with the way No Way Home ended. This makes total sense to deal with this more somber mood for Spider-Man and tell the story of him figuring himself out through this. And now that he seems to have successfully done so, I would really be excited to see what they do next. So that's sort of my overall feeling. It is good. I did enjoy it. I was not blown away by it, but I did enjoy it, and I liked it more the more I thought about it, which is always a good sign. So now we're going to do spoilers. You've been warned. So Jean Grey is the villain. Now, this was a theory that I had heard. And I think it was mainly pinned down because Sadie Sink was in this, and Sadie Sink has been fan cast as Jean Grey for basically since Stranger Things 4. So once people realized she was in this, the theorists put two and two together, and I had heard that theory. I was still disinclined to believe it going in, if only because it was a choice that to me felt like it was going to paint Jean Grey in a corner a little bit. But it is what they went with, and I am still worried that they're going to paint Jean Grey in the corner. So here's, for the purposes of this movie, using her as the villain, or at least for the majority of the runtime, because shock of shocks, the damage control, which is, consolidating all of the data and information about, the supervillains and what they can do, and apparently recruiting some of them, because that's why the Hand is in this. Best use of the Hand by far. We deal with none of their ideological nonsense, and they're just ninjas who get their asses kicked. Awesome. That's the only way the Hand should be used. But anyway, yeah, shock of shocks, damage control, who is recruiting some of the villains and learning from their tech. They are actually the bad guys. Wow. Who saw that coming? Everybody. But regardless, having Jean be the villain up to that point mostly works here. I say mostly just because I do feel like the film doesn't reckon with her methodology. It's one of those cases where we find out why she's doing what she's doing, and it is a very understandable motivation, and there's even some catharsis for her getting closure on why it is she's doing all of this. But at the same time, the film doesn't really properly reckon with the things that she did in pursuit of that goal, because she did some messed up stuff. The way they've opted to use her power set in the first place is really fascinating, and I do think paints them in a corner for when or how they're going to use her again. Just on the off chance that you're watching the spoiler section but didn't see the movie, she has, to some degree, telepathy and develops telekinesis, but her main power seen in the movie is that she can kind of leap her mind into other people and basically control them completely. That person blacks out and they'll regain control when she leaves. But while she's doing it, she still maintains, full control of her own body. So it's not like she passes out and her full consciousness is in somebody else. She just projects a part of herself, and that can leapfrog. So while there's a limited range, I think it's established as 33 feet for how far she can leap. She can then leap into so she can get way further than 33 feet from her own original body as long as she's continually leaping at people, which is a really interesting way to do it. Especially some of the scenes where she's taunting Spider-Man. It reminded me more than a little bit of the 90s Denzel Washington movie Fallen, which is one of my top underrated movies. I love that movie, so that was no bad thing. But where I'm going with this is like she's really ruthless. And in terms of having that be her power set, like, yes, they established that maybe she can't possess everybody because like she gets kicked out of Spidey's head, which, you know, he has some degree of power, so maybe this doesn't always work on certain people with certain types of powers. They kind of dance around it. But with this as an established power set, it's going to be really hard to use her again in future because they're either gonna have to nerf her severely or they're gonna have a really hard time explaining why she just doesn't do this and fix nearly every problem. Because the ease with which she does this puts her in a situation where she could resolve a very large number of threats herself, single-handedly. Like, if you don't believe me from just describing it, trust me, the way it is displayed with how she does this, she totally could. And especially seeing what she's willing to do, and when she feels justified, it's not impossible, but it would take a lot of dedicated work of like establishing her, say, if she links up with whatever version of Charles Xavier is ultimately going to be the one in this universe after Doomsday happens, that you're going to have to dedicate a lot of work into making me believe that Charles could legitimately convince her to not do this kind of stuff again, even though she can, because she's going to be put into situations, I guarantee you, where doing what we see her doing this would fix the situation, but they're going to have to come up with a reason why she can't or won't. And yeah, I'm also a little tired of the dark side of Jean Grey. Like, look, I know it's part of her deal, Dark Phoenix and whatnot, but we have had way more Dark Phoenix-y Jean Grey than we have had just Jean Grey at this point. Or at least it feels like it. And I'm just kind of tired that, like, every time we have Jean Grey, we're either dealing with her doing darker stuff, or we're clearly setting up that she's gonna start doing darker stuff. It seems like getting her to Dark Phoenix is 3/4 of the point every time she's introduced. And while I don't think Jean is the most fascinating character around, there is more to her than the fact that she's sometimes a villain. Can we do something else? And maybe they will with whatever she appears in after this. We'll see. But I am, a little bit mixed because, again, largely for the purposes of this film and removing any concerns about how they can or will use her later, I just feel a little bit like they don't properly reckon with how messed up the stuff she did was. But that having been said, I mean, it is at least a case of just Peter letting her go, and given like the parallels with his own issues. And again, like I said, the themes sort of complementing each other. I get why he lets her go. And thankfully they don't do a thing where like the cops or whatever are like, no, just let her walk away. No, they don't do that, because that, I wouldn't have bought that for a second. MJ and Ned back in this doing pretty well. Peter and MJ still absolutely great together. They do this little setup with Ned having like an addiction to an energy thing, which makes me wonder if they'll actually go places with that in later films. I am curious. It wouldn't be the end of the world if it doesn't go anywhere, but I am curious if they go somewhere with that. I really loved Yelena showing up in this. I love the use of her in this. Did it need to be her? Absolutely not. Did I smile hugely when she showed up and every single time she appeared in the movie? Yes. Yes, I did. The use of Hulk, solid. Yeah, no real notes one way or the other. It is a little bit weird seeing like hulked out, green Hulk with graying hair. Like, it's fine. It just threw me a little. But my favorite of the non-Spider or of the characters you would not necessarily expect to appear in Spider-Man to appear in this was Yelena. And then honestly, Frank, like I said, while I don't like this take on Frank, this is a good dynamic to put him in, where I enjoyed him about as much as I'm ever going to enjoy this take on Frank, which was pretty decently. And then Hulk was fine. Totally okay. No real notes one way or the other on that. And as I said, far better use of the hand than the freaking Daredevil and Defenders shows did. Good God. Like, I was nervous about the use of the hand. They do some more with Scorpion, but he ultimately doesn't really matter. I do think overall this coming out of it, I felt like that felt a little messy. But thinking on it, it was tied up a little bit better than I thought. Because initially I had thought like the whole developing organic web shooters and he's kind of, having further mutations didn't feel like it was fully complementing a lot of the other stuff going on. Except that this is a movie ultimately about him figuring out who he's going to be. And whoever that is has to be something new. It can't just be who he was before, even as he is striving to reestablish some of the relationships that he let go. It's not a contradiction for him to reconnect with MJ and Ned because still other parts of his life are changing and have to change, but that doesn't mean he has to give up everything that he had before. So like I said, I did need a couple of days to sort of come to terms with how these themes interlocked, but I do think they pulled together pretty well. And overall, I enjoyed this. Spider-Man! Brand new day. What'd you think about this one? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills and enables me to do this as my living. Even if you can't help me out that way, like, share, subscribe. They all help. Don't worry too much about it, though. We take a relaxed attitude around here, so you can just come on back next time you need a break. Now to thank my highest supporting patrons. Robin Moore, Jared Boyce, Ruben Lafula, Daphne Matthews, Kay Johnston, Auntie Kate 808, Mira G, Angry Casper, Dave Hall, Snark Shark, Oliver B, Mystic Shadow, Stephen Miller, Welsh Wrestling Geeks, Magdalena, Melissa Pedersen, Becky Sparks, Twilord, Tracy Scrabbit, Claire Wright, Pal Baraba Joggle, and Sir Didymus is my favorite. Additionally, I'd like to thank from the lower tiers of support, John Dent, Erez87, and Quark 12,000. Well, you guys might like to see Archie this month. Everybody loves you. How could you not love